We've officially gotten there. There are some actual first round matchups that are complete, no longer waiting for every team to figure out what is going to be our second round matchup. And the first one that has been confirmed, and by far the most interesting one to me, is Bucks versus Nets. Now that we officially have this series happening, though I was relatively confident that would be the series regardless, we can finally talk about it. This is probably going to be the most interesting matchup pre-finals unless the Battle of LA happens. Even then, this series might actually be more interesting. And also, whether or not Battle of LA actually happens is very much up in the air right now. This one's definitely happening. Both the Nets and the Bucks are contenders, and the best... My phone has been here this whole time. Both the Nets and the Bucks are contenders and the best teams in their conference, and typically that means that we will see them play each other in the conference finals, but this time around we're going to be seeing them in round 2. So Bucks versus Nets, who will win? Let's talk about it. Before I continue on with this video, about half the people that watch these videos are not subscribed, so if you fall into that 50%, then please subscribe for daily playoff content. Also drop a like on this video, it only takes 1 second and makes a massive difference. And go subscribe to my second channel that is nearly at 50k, and I'd like to get to 50k soon. Over on that channel, I do post-game reactions to pretty much every playoff game, or at least a majority of them, so go subscribe for that type of content. This series to me is incredibly interesting because of how much these teams clash in terms of play style and the roster construction that comes from that type of play style. The Nets are all about the perimeter game, meanwhile the Bucks are more focused on the inside on both ends of the court. The Bucks generate their offense through Giannis being unstoppable going to the basket, and that creates opportunities on the perimeter. Meanwhile, the Nets are all about their perimeter game, creating off of the dribble, and really just taking turns between 3 of the greatest shot creators in the history of basketball. Meanwhile, also having 4 and 5 options that you have to respect as well, so that makes them pretty damn impossible to guard. So let's talk about this matchup, and really in particular how these teams can defend each other. Specifically, defend each other's star players, because this is a very star-studded series. There are 6 players in the series that I would consider star caliber. 3 that are superstar caliber, so it's basically just a fucking all-star game in round 2. For the Bucks, as good as Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton are, really you can play them straight up. Those guys are most likely not going to kill you in a series offensively. They'll have games here or there, but it's not like it's some impossible task to guard those guys. Meanwhile, guarding the likes of Giannis is a much more difficult and complex task. And Giannis is by far the biggest threat to the Nets in the conference, and probably just in the league period, because his ability to get to the basket combined with the Nets not having good interior defense is kind of a recipe for giving up a fuck ton of points. The Nets' best hope at actually slowing down Giannis in any capacity is trying to mimic the wall defense we have seen from the Miami Heat 2 years ago now, and the Raptors the year previous, or the year before the Heat, not year previous to now, you know what I mean. Now, the Nets don't exactly have the proper personnel to pull off this type of defense effectively, but I'd say they have it good enough, and if they put in the effort to pull off like a D+, C-, maybe at its absolute high, like a C version of that style of defense. As for how they do that, I would put either Kevin Durant or Jeff Green, who is currently injured but should be back in time for at least a majority of this series, on Giannis. Now, Kevin Durant can get bodied by Giannis, and Jeff Green isn't always the most engaged defender, even if he's more physical than Kevin Durant. So it's an interesting circumstance. Kevin Durant's defense ever since the Achilles tear has looked particularly suspect, when at times he's looked like one of the better defenders in the league. As of late, especially defending Jason Tatum, really suspect. Kevin Durant has good length in a way that he can get his hands in the way of whatever Giannis is trying to do, but he can also just get pushed out of the way with Giannis's physicality. Jeff Green is more likely to match the physicality, but maybe not quite as good a length as Kevin Durant, though I don't think it's too big of a difference. Really, I'd probably give Jeff Green the matchup just simply because he is more likely to commit all his energy into that and less detrimental to your offense. If Jeff Green decides I'm going to put 100% effort into guarding Giannis and all I'm going to do is shoot spot up threes, that's kind of all he was doing anyway. So that's a better idea than Kevin Durant putting all of his energy into it and then he's not doing much offensively. Now, neither of those matchups are the best, but they're at least something that Giannis can't outright abuse, which is pretty much anything else that the Nets would try and do. So there's that. Maybe you make the argument, hey, put Nicholas Claxton on him, but I would rather Nicholas focus more on being a help defender, similar to how that wall defensive scheme works, get Giannis in a bad position where he has to physical his way to the basket, and if he does get to the basket, he gets met by a good help defender, in this case Nicholas Claxton, rather than like Bam Adebayo or Serge Ibaka or Marc Gasol. Also have your guards, I'm especially thinking like James Harden in this situation because he's really strong. Get those guys ready to bring help defense, have Kevin Durant help when he can, not so much that you're sacrificing easy perimeter shots, but enough that it's not Giannis just getting to the basket easily. Force them to do stuff on the perimeter and make shots that way, because as good as Drew and Middleton are, if you're preventing Giannis from scoring, I don't think those guys are going to outscore the Nets, to say the least. I don't even know if they can outscore the Nets with Giannis playing at his best, which is a conversation we'll have. But regardless, slow down Giannis, you're definitely winning that series, and I think they have the personnel, and if they just commit to it fully, they can slow him down a bit, or at the very least, and more likely, prevent him from just completely going off, which is what a lot of people predict, is that Giannis is going to average 35 to 40 points per game in this series, and this type of defense would prevent that. Now, do I actually think the Nets will do this, and do this successfully? Not really. I don't think they really have the mentality to do it. I saw in that Celtics series that it doesn't seem like they really put that much effort in defensively. Part of it is there's a massive gap in talent there. Maybe when there's less of one, which isn't the case in the second round matchup, they'll take it a bit more seriously. In fact, I would expect that. But I don't have a lot of reason to believe that the Nets are just going to outright commit to a very strong and very much takes a lot of commitment defensive scheme. I just don't know that they have that in them. The Nets mentality seems to be, let's just outscore our opponent. And that mentality tends to work because they can outscore nearly any opponent ever. So the question is, will the Nets offense be good enough to make up for the fact that their defense will not be good enough to slow down the Bucks at all? And can the Bucks slow down the Nets offense to the point where, even though the Nets will still score a lot, because the Nets can't defend the Bucks will score enough that they can make up that difference? So the question is, will the Bucks be able to slow down the Nets offense at all? Well, as for how they do that, first of all, Brook Lopez has got to learn how to embrace the role of being a cheerleader, because there's no chance in hell that he can play in this series pretty much at all. Holy fuck, can that guy just simply not be on the floor versus this team. A drop coverage big, which is what Brook Lopez is, just simply cannot stay on the floor versus a team that has three of the greatest pull-up shooters ever and three of the best ISO scorers ever. If Lopez is in a position where he has to step up on a pull-up jump shot, he won't. And if he gets on a switch, God knows he's not guarding Kyrie, James Harden, or Kevin Durant. So just don't fucking play him. It's not going to work in any capacity. Don't be like, oh, maybe he can get some post points on their small defense. No, don't. Just don't play Brook Lopez. Please. I'm begging you, Mike Budenholzer. Don't play Brook Lopez. They need to put PJ Tucker at power forward and Giannis as center. I've always wanted them to run that lineup to begin with, but they specifically need to run that lineup versus this team. And when either of those guys are not seeing the floor, put Bobby Portis in there, who is a little bit more capable on a switch. Still not the best option in the world, but at least he's a better three-point shooter than Brook and is definitely more capable in terms of stepping up in the pick and roll and things like that. Giannis should defend Kevin Durant and commit a good chunk of his energy towards that matchup, as he did versus Jimmy Butler. I think Giannis is probably one of the best options in the league in terms of guarding Kevin Durant. So when you have that option, use it. I understand people make the argument, oh, he should conserve his energy for defense, but Giannis is a defensive player of the year. You don't get that excuse when you're defensive player of the year. You put your energy in fully on defense if you're truly that level of defender, and I believe, and I honestly know, that Giannis is. So Giannis on Kevin Durant, no bullshit excuse of Giannis needs energy for offense. No, he'll find it for defense if he is the defensive player that we are told that he is, and I think he is. Now, what's interesting to me is who you put Jrue Holiday on, because Jrue can guard both Kyrie Irving and James Harden, but because Harden is more in the distributor role and a little bit less of a threat to score than Kyrie, even if he is a better scorer than Kyrie, I would kind of feel like putting Jrue on Kyrie rather than Harden and Middleton on Harden, which is weird because like Harden's a better scorer, but he's just way more of a playmaker on the net. So I guess Middleton would be better there, and then Jrue Holiday is guarding the player who's going to shoot more. He's also more capable of slowing down and stopping Kyrie than he is James Harden, so that would be the matchup I'd go with. You got to put PJ Tucker on whoever they have in at center, whether it is Nick Claxton or Jeff Green or Blake Griffin. None of those three guys are going to be like beating PJ on physicality. Nick is skinny. Blake's just not what he used to be and not someone who's really using his power that much. And Jeff Green is not going to do that either. He's mostly a spot shooter who sometimes creates off the dribble. Like, PJ can guard all three of those guys, no issue, and that should be just fine. Whoever is guarding Joe Harris, because unfortunately we're not going to be seeing any Dante DiVincenzo because he's injured for the rest of the playoffs. Whoever is guarding Joe Harris, don't give him an ounce of space. You got to stick to this guy like glue because he's a fucking 48% three-point shooter. Twice now. He's done that in a full regular season on 5 to 6 attempts. So don't leave him open. Also, don't bring doubles. Like, I know they did some of that against the Heat. You can't do that against this team. If you're doubling Kevin Durant, you're leaving James Harden and Kyrie Irving a potential opportunity to create offense, or you're leaving a 48% three-point shooter wide open. So you just can't bring double teams unless one of them is off of the floor at the very least. So you have to keep pressure on three of the best perimeter scorers ever, but you also can't bring doubles because you leave a 48% three-point shooter open, and you have to run small because you can't do drop coverage and you can't get a big that will be easily crossed over and blown by out there. So fuck, there's a lot of complexities to this, and this is a tough team to guard the more I think about it. And for the net side of things, like trying to counter whatever the Bucks do, just outright, if Brook Lopez sees a second on the floor, you attack him every time. Force him to defend in space because he'll be terrible at it, just straight up terrible at it. On the Bucks side offensively, Giannis just needs to run to the basket anytime that he can. And if there's enough help defense that he has to pass it out, those guys have to hit their outside shot. It doesn't get very complex in terms of this Bucks offense, just Giannis attacks, and then everyone else has to make their open shots. Defending the Nets is a huge challenge, and a challenge that I think the Bucks are the most well-equipped to take in the league, but still a challenge nonetheless. But at the same time, the Nets probably aren't going to defend the Bucks really at all. So it's kind of a toss-up to me in terms of if the Bucks offense will be good enough against the Nets' poor defense, along with the Bucks defense being good enough to kind of slow down the Nets offense. I just keep kind of going back and forth here because I honestly don't know in terms of picking which team here wins. Even if the Bucks defend the Nets better than any other team in the league, really you have to create a roster from scratch with unlimited resources in order to build a team well equipped really to defend the Nets, because their offensive firepower is just too much for any defense in the league. I picked the Nets to win the championship this year, and if, you know, this was 2 months ago when I made like a bracket prediction, I would have had the Nets winning in 5, maybe 6. But now I'm going to say Nets win in 6, probably even 7, because what the Bucks did in round 1 like really impressed me. It showed me that they were more capable of making change, but at the same time they also did not make changes on the fly, mostly because the Heat never put them in the position where they needed to. But if Brook Lopez sees the floor early in the series, and especially if he continues to see the floor when that is clearly a bad idea, then that's going to be a big difference maker. So I'm going to go Nets in 6 or 7 because I still pick them as the better team here, still pick them as the team that will win the championship, but I have my concerns about them, and I am a lot bigger of a believer in the Milwaukee Bucks after what I saw in round 1. So Nets in 6 or 7, but absolutely could go either way, and regardless, I am expecting an all-time great series. Again, go subscribe to my second channel. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, but at the end of this video, please be sure to like and subscribe for more NBA content like this, and cue the outro music.